All right, now we're in the book of Revelation chapter 14. And let's remember where we're at because it's so important. The last time John said after these things, because remember I said, every time John says after these things, you're completely changing subjects. And you'll be in that subject until John says after these things again. And the last time John said that was Revelation chapter 7, verse 9. And we immediately went into the tribulation, and those who go into the tribulation and get saved in the tribulation. And we're still in that subject. And in the last message, we talked about chapter 14 is the harvest, the harvesting of the earth. And the first thing we saw was the first fruits. Those that are ready, watching, waiting, that are caught up to the throne of God before the tribulation, the pre-tribulation rapture, the first fruits of the token of the harvest to come. And having just had that first fruits taken, that pre-tribulation rapture, what's the next thing we start to read? Revelation 14, starting in verse 6. And I saw another angel. So saints, by now, if you've heard these messages, you know another thing we have to know, is that every time you see an angel in the book of Revelation, that angel is bringing you, the church, a message from God. So we see here, we're in the tribulation period. We're still in these two signs from Revelation chapter 12. The sign of the woman giving birth, the pre-tribulation rapture. The woman fleeing into the wilderness where she has a place prepared for her. The church, a Laodicea, that goes into the tribulation period. And Satan. And we saw Satan in the kingdom of the beast and the antichrist in chapter 13. So now we're in chapter 14. We have had the first fruits. Verse 1 through verse 5. And now we're in verse 6. And I saw another angel. So this angel is bringing us a message to the saints, about the saints, in the tribulation period. And I saw another angel flying in mid-heaven, having, what is this message? Here we go, saints. What we're going to have here is three angels with three messages from God for the church that goes into the tribulation and those that get saved in the tribulation. This will be the three messages that the church that goes into the tribulation and those get saved in the tribulation, that will be their three messages throughout the tribulation period. And I saw another angel flying in mid-heaven. And what's the first message that an angel brings? A message from God for the saints in the tribulation. Having the eternal gospel to preach to those who live upon the earth. What else would be the first message? The gospel, the grace, through the blood of the Lamb. That could only be the first message, having the eternal gospel to preach. So this angel's bringing a message to the saints that go into the tribulation or get saved in the tribulation to preach the gospel. Having an eternal gospel to preach to those who live on the earth. And to every nation and tribe and tongue and people. So what it's saying here, the first message to those that go into the tribulation or get saved in the tribulation is to preach the gospel. And that's what the Lord was talking about in Matthew 24, starting in verse 14. Talking about the end times. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in the whole world for a witness to all nations. And then the end shall come. This is that going to be fulfilled by those Christians that go into the tribulation, that weren't ready, weren't waiting, weren't watching, they loved the world and the things of the world. This will be their first message. And around the world, each Christian community around the world, all nations, all islands, all tongues, all people will fulfill this in preaching the gospel around the world. And then the end can come after that. And in verse 7, and he said with a loud voice, fear God concerning this first message of preaching the eternal gospel in the first part of the tribulation year, as the tribulation is started. And they're saying that. They're preaching the eternal gospel. And they're saying, fear God and give Him glory, because the hour of His judgment is come. They're going to be preaching the gospel and saying these are the end times. Now His judgment is coming. And worship Him who made the heaven and the earth and the sea and the springs of the water. So the first message to the saints in the tribulation is to preach the gospel and tell them that the kingdom of God, His judgment's coming. And in verse 8, and another angel. So another message to the saints. They go into the tribulation and they get saved in the tribulation. And what's the second message? The second one followed, saying, fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, she who has made all the nations drink of the wine of the passion of her immorality. So the second message, so now you can see that Babylon falls at the beginning of the tribulation, because the second message these saints are going to be preaching is that Babylon has fallen. That's why those who try to tell you, those on the broad road to destruction, that this is a continuous book with a continuous story are wrong. Because we haven't even come to Babylon falling yet. Babylon falling is described in chapter 18. We're in chapter 14. These angels, this angel brought this message to the saints. Tell everybody, Babylon has fallen. When that asteroid hits, it's not just another disaster. The tribulation has started. Babylon has fallen. And who and what is Babylon? Babylon is the world. Babylon is the kingdom of the world. But in those end times, there will be that country, like there was Babylon, like there was the Roman Empire. There'll be that country that dominates the world with its military, with its might, with its power, with its authority. And that can only be the United States at this time. And they will be saying that Babylon has fallen, as we've seen, in 1 hour of one day from an asteroid hitting in the ocean off the coast. So we have this second message that the saints are declaring. Declaring that Babylon has fallen. God's judgment is coming. In verse 9, and another angel, here we have another angel, another message for the saints that go into the tribulation and that get saved in the tribulation to be declaring. And what's that third message? And another angel, a third one followed them, saying with a loud voice, here's the third message, saints, that the saints will be preaching. And not just the Gentiles. As the Gentile church is caught up and the time of the Gentiles is over at the middle of the tribulation, through the preaching, teaching, witnessing, death and resurrection of those two witnesses, Israel will then take over these messages. And leading up to the middle of the tribulation, the Gentiles will be declaring this third message, but Israel will also pick it up and declare and preach all three of these messages. And what's the third message? The third one followed, saying with a loud voice, if anyone worships the beast and his image, and receives a mark on his forehead or on his hand, he also will drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is mixed in full strength in the cup of his anger, and he will be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. So the third message that the Gentile church will be preaching. They'll be preaching the gospel. They'll be saying that Babylon has fallen, the tribulation has come. And they'll be saying that the kingdom of the beast and the antichrist are coming, and if you take his mark, you will go to hell and be tormented forever and forever. And Israel will pick up these messages at the middle of the tribulation and declare them. And in verse 11, and the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever, and they have no rest day and night. So these things are coming through these messages from the beginning of the tribulation, working to the end of the tribulation, and going on to the results of those that reject Christ throughout eternity. And the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever, and they have no rest day and night. Those who worship the beast and his image, and whoever receives the mark of his name. And listen here, saints, and here is the perseverance of the saints who keep the commandments of God and their faith in Yeshua, their faith in Jesus. And I heard a voice from heaven saying, right, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Yes, says the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, for their deeds follow them. Why is that mentioned here? This perseverance. Once again, the perseverance of the saints. Here's the perseverance of the saints. It's brought all this down to the time of the beast, the time of the Antichrist, to the time of those who worship the Antichrist being separated for God forever. Because we're coming down now to the end of the tribulation. The last 3.5 years of the tribulation is the Jews are preaching these messages. And here is the perseverance of the saints. Particularly right here, the Jewish saints who keep the commandments of God. Mentioning once again, quickly, the commandments of God. In their faith in Yeshua. And I heard a loud voice from heaven saying, right, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. That's why this is taken to the saints. In Israel, the church in Israel, the congregation in Israel, because they're the ones that are going to pay primarily with their life. At this point, the last half of the tribulation, these 3 messages include Israel, and they will be paying with their life. Right, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. The last 3.5 years of the tribulation, when the Antichrist turns against the believers, the Jewish believers. Yes, says the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors and from their deeds, for their deeds follow with them. So it comes down. It brings these 3 messages from the preaching of the gospel. Babylon has fallen. Don't take the mark of the beast, or you will pay with eternal separation from God. And letting the Jewish people know, you're going to be paying with your life now, but you're going to become the crowning glory of the temple of the living God. And saints, we're now in the middle of chapter 14, and those on the broad road to destruction don't want to hear this stuff. They don't have their games, their weird stories. We've only seen one thing. An asteroid hit and caused Babylon to fall, the second angel. And we will continue on with this revelation of the Son of the living God.